Please turn your Bibles to Proverbs 6. Proverbs 6. I've got a question. What do you think is most commonly committed sin in America today? What sin is most commonly committed by Americans today? Now, most of us would probably say it's obviously lying, right? Deception is really common today. Others would say, no, coveting is way more common than lying. I used to think it was thievery. I heard that, $300 billion worth of goods are stolen from stores each year. What about sexual immorality? This question got me thinking, what is most commonly committed sin in America today? In reality, it's none of these. It's actually much, much worse. The most commonly committed sin in America today is none other than the sin of pride. I recently heard that LeBron James, definitely among the most skilled basketball players of the NBA, I recently heard that he has a very high ego. One thing I heard, he leaves the team, I forget which team, but he leaves the team after having so many losses with it, but then he ends up losing to this team after leaving them for another team. Okay, pride is not a small sin. It's way bigger than most of us view it as. But how? What does this mean? In this message, we will look at what pride is and what the result of pride is so that we can understand this issue better. So what is pride? What is pride? First, we have to understand pride is sin. Okay, Proverbs 6:16 says, "These 6 things doth the Lord hate, yea, 7 are an abomination unto him." Verse 17, a proud look. A proud look. Now, if God doesn't like something, it's most likely going to be sin. And this verse says that God hates pride. Okay, then figure out and say the 6 other things that God hates, which, if we look deep enough, they are caused by pride. Okay, but we see that pride is the first sin on the list. So the first thing that came to mind for Solomon, the wisest man who has ever lived on this planet, the first thing that came to mind is pride. Solomon obviously saw pride as a huge abomination to God. Pride is sin. Pride is thinking of ourselves. Pride is me, I'm in control. And when we put ourselves above everything, including God, when we put ourselves above this, that is where we are sinning. Okay, when we put ourselves at the top, where's God in our lives? Okay, He's not at the top, that's where we are. Putting ourselves above the sovereignty of God is sin. Pride is sin. Pride is disobeying God, and it has no place in our lives. Also, pride is the sin of sins. Pride is the sin of sins. Proverbs 13:10 says, "Only by pride cometh contention, but with the well-advised is wisdom." Only by pride comes contention or disagreement. Disagreement with what? Could be disagreement with a friend. It could be disagreement with a parent. It could be disagreement with a spouse. It could be disagreement with a boss. It could be disagreement with a sibling, your cousin. But who put these people in our lives? When we rebel against anyone, we have to understand we can, in essence, be rebelling against God. Now, this isn't to say that every time we disagree on something, we're sinning. Okay, that's far from it. But when we disagree on something that God deems right, that is where we are sinning. Okay? Pride, only by pride brings disagreement with God. Only by pride comes sin. In the Garden of Eden, we see Lucifer, definitely the greatest angel that God ever created. We see him fall into sin, and specifically the sin of pride. Okay, Isaiah 14:12 says, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of congregation in the sides of the north." Then he says, "I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be the most high." Okay, so the first sin ever committed was the sin of pride. Okay, and then this led to Lucifer, now known as Satan, deceiving Adam and Eve into eating the fruit that God forbade them to eat. And now everyone on the planet is a sinner. Everyone that is living, everyone that has lived, and everyone that will live. We only sin through pride. We must understand that every sin we make is rooted to pride in some way or another. Okay? Pride is a sin of sins. Now, what is the result of pride? What is the result of pride? First, pride brings disgrace. Proverbs 11:2 says, "When pride cometh, then comes shame." I have an illustration for this. My favorite sport is probably basketball. All right, how many basketball fans here? All right, Alright, so my favorite sport is probably basketball. I remember my 7th grade year, my coach put me in as point guard for some time in the first game of the tournament. He soon realized that this was a mistake. So I remember going up to start a play, and I have a teammate right down by the basket. Right, but instead of passing to my teammate, who can easily make a layup, I unnecessarily cross over through the legs, and the first dribble I take is a carry because of how high the crossover is and because of how much attention I want for myself ultimately. Pride results in shame to ourselves, and in some cases it will haunt us for a long period of time. Pride brings disgrace, pride brings remorse, and pride brings shame. But pride ultimately brings guilt. Next, we see pride brings destruction. Proverbs 16:18, many of us have it memorized. It says, pride goeth before a fall. No, pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty or arrogant spirit before a fall. I can't put it more clearly. Pride brings destruction both physically and spiritually. One constant consequence of pride, although not always immediate, is destruction. It mostly destroys friendships, both physically and spiritually. My pride hurts my relationship with God. Let's say Patrick over here. Let's say Patrick and I are really tight. All right, let's say Patrick and I are really tight. We're great friends. We help each other with homework, spend the night texting each other. We hang out with each other in all our free time. Patrick and I wish the best for each other, right? Well, one day I point my nose up, thinking I'm better than him, And then, I threaten not to help him with homework. I threaten not to hang out with him. Delete him as my contact. I don't know, unfriend him on Facebook or something. In fact, I end up ignoring him altogether. Why? Because I think I'm better than him. This is pride. This is pride. This is sin. Now, God is our friend. God is by far our closest friend. Is having God as a low priority, sometimes not even a priority at all, is having God like this and rejecting Him gonna grow us closer together? No, it's gonna rip us apart. It's gonna rip us apart. Pride ruins and destroys both physical and spiritual friendships. And finally, pride brings death. Please turn to James 4. It says in verse 6, but he giveth more grace, wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble. So notice, God resists the proud. Now for KJV, I found that resist doesn't mean to simply ignore or stay away from. Resist means to literally be against. Now if God, the only person that can send down fire for Elijah as he did in the Old Testament, and the only person that can literally open the earth up and then seal it back up when needed is against you, you're going to bail out if you know what's good for you, which, by the way, is a sign of humility. There's several illustrations that God puts in the Bible to enforce that pride can bring death. One illustration I'd like to point out is King Ahab. The Bible portrays him as a very, very bad king. In fact, he was worse than all the other kings who reigned before him. So what happens, King Ahab requests that a man named Naboth gives him his vineyard. When Naboth says no, being the mature and grown man that he is, Ahab complains to his wife, Jezebel, who happens to be the most wicked queen that Israel has ever seen. Long story short, Naboth ends up being killed and his property goes to Ahab. You have to understand, pride can kill people whether or not it's the person being prideful. Pride can either kill the person who's being prideful or other people they interact with. We must all understand that pride is very, very bad and its consequences can end up being worse. But God doesn't leave us with this thought, does He? There's a solution for pride. What is the solution for pride? I know it sounds simple, but we must refrain from being prideful. Again, it's simple, but we must refrain from being prideful. Romans 12:16 says, be of the same mind toward one another. Mind not high things, but condescend to the man of low estate. Be not wise in your own conceits. Be not wise in your own conceits. We are not to be wise in our own conceits. We have been commanded not to think on our own behalf. Now, don't get me wrong. Pride is a sin that everyone has. It is not uncommon. Everyone struggles with pride a lot. Okay, but God doesn't promise that we won't be tempted. 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, "No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it." He promises that we will be able to stay from temptation. The only way to solve our pride is to flee from it. Not just resist it, flee from it. Okay? If we let pride take over our lives, if we let pride ruin our lives, we will never be free from it. Okay? We will never, ever be free from pride. We must flee. We must run from the temptation of pride. So we have now gone over what pride is, what it does, and how to solve it. Okay, pride is both sin and the sin of sins. Pride brings shame, disgrace, and guilt. But if we flee from it, it can't harm us. It can't harm us. St. Augustine, an early Christian theologian, once said, "It was pride that changed angels into devils, but it is humility that makes men as angels." Pride will ruin our lives and the lives of people around us. Okay, the only person that can make the decision to stay from all this pride and